The relentless heat of twin suns bore down on Luke Kowalski as he stumbled through the dense alien foliage of Iridia 7. His once pristine pilot's uniform hung in tatters, barely clinging to his sweat-soaked body. 3 days had passed since he'd last tasted food or water, and the effects of dehydration were taking their toll. His cracked lips bled, stinging with each labored breath, while a myriad of scratches crisscrossed his skin. Souvenirs from the unforgiving jungle that surrounded him. Luke's mind drifted hazily between consciousness and delirium, his thoughts a jumbled mess of memories and survival instincts. The crash of his ship playing on repeat in his mind's eye, a cacophony of screeching metal and warning sirens that had heralded his unexpected arrival on this alien world. Now all that remained of his former life was the tattered uniform on his back and an emergency beacon that hung uselessly at his side, its distress signal lost in the vast emptiness of space. As he trudged onward, massive ferns unfurled before him, their fronds seeming to reach out and tangle around his legs. Roots, gnarled and treacherous, snaked across the forest floor, threatening to trip him with each unsteady step. Overhead, colossal mushroom-like trees towered impossibly high, their caps glowing with an otherworldly bioluminescence that cast eerie, shifting shadows across the jungle floor. The sound of running water tantalized Luke's senses, echoing from somewhere in the depths below. His parched throat constricted painfully at the thought of cool, life-giving liquid, but his weakened body betrayed him. He was simply too exhausted to navigate the treacherous terrain in search of its source. Yet despite his dire circumstances, a prickling sensation at the base of his skull told Luke that dehydration and starvation were not his only concerns. Every time he paused to catch his breath or survey his surroundings, a subtle disturbance in the ambient sounds of the jungle caught his attention. The faint rustle of leaves, the almost imperceptible sound of careful footsteps, signs that he was not alone in this alien wilderness. Someone or something was stalking him. The realization sent a surge of adrenaline through Luke's system, momentarily sharpening his dull senses. He had been a pilot, yes, but his training had covered more than just flying spacecraft. Survival skills, including evasion and hand-to-hand combat, had been drilled into him during his time in the Earth Space Force. Now those lessons bubbled to the surface of his consciousness. Mixing with the raw instinct for survival that had kept him going these past days, Luke's mind raced, formulating a plan. He needed to confirm his suspicions, and if possible, turn the tables on his mysterious pursuer. With a deep breath, he steeled himself for what he was about to do. In a carefully orchestrated move, Luke allowed his legs to give way beneath him. He collapsed to the ground, his body going limp as he fell face first into the soft alien grass. The impact knocked what little air remained from his lungs, but he forced himself to remain still. To play the part of unconscious prey, silence descended upon the jungle, broken only by the distant calls of unseen creatures and the gentle rustling of leaves in the warm breeze. Luke's heart thundered in his chest, but he willed his breathing to slow, to become shallow and even. He strained his ears, listening intently for any sign of approach. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours, as Luke lay motionless on the jungle floor. The damp earth beneath him seeped into his clothes, and he fought the urge to shiver. Just as he began to wonder if he had imagined the whole thing, he heard it, the unmistakable sound of cautious footsteps drawing near. His pursuer was taking the bait. Luke's muscles tensed imperceptibly as he prepared himself for action. The footsteps grew closer, hesitant but steady. He could sense a presence looming over him, could almost feel the scrutiny of eyes upon his prone form. His every instinct screamed at him to move, to defend himself, but he held fast to his ruse for a moment longer. When he felt the presence was close enough, Luke sprang into action. With a surge of desperate strength, his eyes snapped open as he twisted his body. One hand shot out to grasp the ankle of his stalker. In the same fluid motion, he swept his leg out, catching his opponent off guard and sending them crashing to the ground. Luke wasted no time. He scrambled atop the fallen figure, straddling their midsection as his hands sought purchase on their wrists. It was only then, as he successfully pinned his pursuer to the jungle floor, that he got his first clear look at who, or what had been following him. Beneath him lay a woman, but unlike any he had ever seen. Her skin was a striking shade of blue, reminiscent of the deepest oceans of Earth. Long silvery hair fanned out around her head like a halo, tangled with leaves and twigs from their brief struggle. But it was her eyes that truly captured Luke's attention, large, almond-shaped, and glowing with an intense amber light that seemed to pierce right through him. The alien woman let out a sharp, melodic cry of surprise and anger as Luke held her firmly in place. Her body writhed beneath him, powerful muscles tensing as she tried to break free from his grasp. But Luke, running on pure adrenaline and the desperate need for answers, held fast. "You've been following," he exclaimed, his voice hoarse from days of disuse. His eyes bore into hers, Searching for confirmation, for some hint of her intention, the woman's struggles intensified for a moment before she spat out a response in perfect, albeit accented English. "Let me go." "Human," she hissed, her amber eyes flashing with a mixture of fury and... Was that respect? A smirk tugged at the corner of Luke's cracked lips. Despite his exhaustion, despite the precariousness of his situation, he couldn't help but feel a spark of triumph. "You stalked me for a week," he said, his voice gaining strength. "Now you want to give up so easily." At his words, the woman's struggles ceased abruptly. Her body went still beneath him. Luke watched as her expression shifted. The anger in her eyes didn't disappear entirely, but it was joined by something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or grudging admiration. Her breathing slowed, and then, to Luke's surprise, her lips curved into a strange, almost predatory smile. "Fine," she conceded, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "But you're smarter than I thought." Sensing a shift in the dynamic between them, Luke cautiously released his hold on her wrists. He remained alert, ready to defend himself if this proved to be a ruse, but the woman made no move to attack. Instead, she propped herself up on her elbows, studying him with an intensity that made him feel as if she could see right through his very soul. "She announced," her chin lifting proudly, "Huntress and guardian of these lands." Luke's mind reeled at the implications of her words. A huntress, a guardian. He had crashed on a planet that was not only inhabited but had its own complex society. The realization both thrilled and terrified him. "Luke," he responded, his voice carrying a hint of weariness. "Pilot from Earth." As the initial tension of their encounter began to dissipate, Luke became acutely aware of his physical state. The burst of adrenaline that had fueled his actions was fading rapidly, leaving him laden and weak. He swayed slightly, fighting to maintain his balance. Xena's eyes narrowed, taking in his condition with a hunter's precision. "You're in no state for further conflict, Earth pilot," she observed, her tone neutral. "Come, there is water nearby." Luke hesitated, unsure if he could trust this alien woman who had been stalking him for days, but the promise of water was too tempting to ignore. He knew he had little choice. With a nod, he allowed Xena to help him to his feet as they made their way through the dense undergrowth. Luke's mind buzzed with questions. Why had she been following him? What were her intentions? And how was it that she spoke English? But exhaustion and thirst overpowered his curiosity, and he focused on putting one foot in front of the other, following Xena's sure-footed steps. They emerged from the thick foliage into a small clearing dominated by a cascading waterfall. The sight of crystal-clear water tumbling over moss covered rocks into a deep, inviting pool was almost too much for Luke to bear. Without thinking, he stumbled forward, dropping to his knees at the water's edge. "Careful," Xena's voice cut through his desperation. "Drink slowly, or you'll make yourself sick." Heeding her warning, Luke cupped his hands and brought the cool water to his lips. The first sip was paradise, soothing his parched throat and bringing instant relief. He forced himself to drink slowly, savoring each mouthful as if it were the most precious thing in the universe. As he quenched his thirst, Luke became aware of Xena moving around the clearing. She seemed to be gathering various plants, examining them closely before tucking some into a pouch at her waist. When she approached him again, she held out a large leaf filled with what looked like berries. She commanded, "They're safe for your kind. They will help restore your strength." Luke eyed the offering warily, but his growling stomach overrode any lingering suspicion. He popped a berry into his mouth, surprised by the burst of sweet, tart flavor. As he ate, he felt some of his strength returning, the fog of exhaustion lifting slightly from his mind. "Thank you," he said quietly, meeting Xena's gaze. "But why are you helping me now? You've been following me for days. Why didn't you approach sooner?" Xena settled herself on a nearby rock, her posture alert despite her relaxed demeanor. "I needed to understand you," she explained, her amber eyes never leaving his face, "to determine if you were a threat to my people, to our way of life." Luke's brow furrowed. "A threat? I'm just a pilot who crashed on your planet. I've been trying to survive, nothing more." A small smile played at the corners of Xena's mouth. "Perhaps. But you are not the first outsider to come to Viridia 7, Luke of Earth, and not all who have come before you had peaceful intentions." The implications of her words hung heavy in the air between them. Luke's mind raced, trying to process this new information. Had there been other human visitors to this planet, or perhaps other alien races? The possibilities were both exciting and terrifying. "I assure you," Luke said earnestly, "I mean no harm to you or your people. I'm just lost, trying to find a way home." Xena regarded him silently for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to Luke's surprise, she nodded. "I believe you," she said softly. "Your actions, your struggle to survive, they speak of a man seeking only to live, not to conquer." Relief washed over Luke. and he felt some of the tension leave his body. "So what happens now?" he asked hesitantly. Xena's lips curved into a mysterious smile. "No, Luke of Earth, we talk. You have much to tell me about your world, and I have much to show you about mine." In the days that followed, Luke and Xena fell into an unexpected rhythm. As Luke regained his strength, they traveled through the lush jungles of Iridia 7, with Xena showing him how to find food and water, how to navigate the sometimes treacherous terrain, and how to avoid the planet's more dangerous flora and fauna. In return, Luke shared stories of Earth and humanity's ventures into space. He found himself painting vivid pictures with his words, describing towering skyscrapers that seemed to touch the clouds, vehicles that moved without animal power, and ships that could cross the vast distances between stars faster than the speed of light. One evening, as they sat beside a small fire in a secluded glade, Luke attempted to explain the concept of the internet and global communication to an increasingly fascinated Xena. "So you're saying," she began, her brow furrowed in concentration, "that your people can instantly share thoughts and images across your entire world using these satellites?" Luke nodded, a smile playing at his lips. "More or less, we call it the internet. It's a vast network that connects computers all over the globe. People can access information, communicate with each other, even conduct business, all in the blink of an eye." Xena's amber eyes widened with wonder. "Can these computers? They are like the one in your ship, the talking box that guided your flight." "Similar, yes, but often much smaller. Some are no bigger than my hand," Luke explained, holding up his palm for reference. "Almost everyone carries one with them. We call them smartphones." Smartphones. Xena repeated the unfamiliar words slowly, because they are intelligent devices for speaking across distances. Luke chuckled. "That's part of it." "Yes, but they do so much more. They can capture images, play music, help navigate unknown territories. In many ways, they're like having all of human knowledge in your pocket." Xena fell silent for a moment, her gaze distant as she processed this information. When she spoke again, her voice was tinged with a mixture of awe and concern. "Your people must be very wise to have created such marvels." Luke's smile faltered slightly. "We've made great technological advancements, it's true, but wisdom, that's another matter entirely." Xena's eyes sharpened, picking up on the change in his tone. "What do you mean?" Luke sighed, poking at the fire with a stick as he gathered his thoughts. "Technology has brought us many benefits, but it's also created new problems. And despite all our advancements, we still struggle with the same basic issues that have plagued humanity for millennia, such as," Xena prodded gently, "war." Luke said softly, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Poverty, quality, environmental destruction. We have the power to communicate instantly across the globe, to travel between stars, and yet, you cannot live in peace." Xena finished for him, her voice filled with understanding. Luke nodded, meeting her gaze. "If you have so much technology," she asked, her tone genuinely curious, "why can't you just live in peace?" Luke let out a humorless chuckle. "You'd think so, wouldn't you? But it seems that no matter how far we go, some humans always want more. More land, more resources, more power. It's exhausting, really." He finished quietly. A comfortable silence fell between them as they both stared into the flickering flames. Luke found himself appreciating Xena's ability to listen without judgment, to ask questions that made him reflect on his own world in ways he hadn't before. The next few days passed in a blur of activity, both grueling and filled with unexpected moments of connection. As Luke and Xena made their way deeper into the wilds of Iridia 7, the jungle began to feel less like a threat and more like an ally. Luke had learned to navigate its hazards with growing confidence, aided by Xena's guidance. The jungle was an ecosystem in perfect balance, an ancient world filled with dangers, but also incredible beauty, if you knew where to look. Xena, despite her stoic demeanor, was a patient teacher. She showed him how to recognize which plants were safe to eat, which ones could heal wounds, and which ones could kill in an instant. Her eyes, glowing with that mesmerizing amber light, never missed a thing. Every rustle of the leaves, every sound of the wind moving through the branches, seemed to speak to her. Luke marveled at her connection to the land. It was more than just knowledge. It was as though she was the land, one with it in a way that he couldn't even begin to comprehend. There were moments when she'd pause, close her eyes, and listen to the jungle as though it were speaking directly to her. And every time, she was right. She could sense things before they even happened. The shift in the air, the approach of a storm, or the distant sound of Tarek's forces moving through the jungle. As much as Luke admired her strength, he also found himself feeling a strange sense of peace when she was near. It was as if the chaos of his life, the crash, the endless fighting, and the struggle for survival had faded away in her presence. Being with her, even in the heart of a battle, felt Right. But the war, the fight against Tarek, was far from over. Every moment of respite, every peaceful pause, was a brief interlude before the storm that was surely coming. Tarek's forces were relentless. They had grown more aggressive, their search for Luke and Xena turning into a full-fledged manhunt. Tarek wanted Xena's leadership, and if he couldn't have it, he'd burn everything to the ground to keep it from her. The tension between them grew thicker with each passing day, and their every move had to be calculated. Xena's plan to unite the clans was risky. She had to meet with the elders from the southern clans, those who still held allegiance to her father, to gain their support. If Tariq got to them first, there would be no hope left for the resistance. "We can't let them reach the grove before we do," Xena had said quietly one evening, her amber eyes glowing with a mixture of determination and dread. "If they do, it's over." Luke nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow as he scanned the dense jungle around them. The air was thick with humidity, but the true weight of their mission lay heavily on his chest. This wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't even just about Xena. This was about a planet, a culture, and a way of life that could be erased if they didn't stop Tarek. As they trekked through the jungle, their path growing more treacherous with every step, Luke's mind wandered back to Earth. He had left behind a world in turmoil, a world where conflict seemed as inherent as breathing. He had never truly understood the depth of what his people were capable of until he saw it mirrored in Xena's struggle with her brother. Tarek was a product of the same ambition and power that had plagued Earth for centuries, a desire for control, for dominance at any cost. Luke had learned to see the world through Xena's eyes. She wasn't just fighting for power. She was fighting for the future of her people, for the values her father had instilled in her. Xena was fighting to protect a way of life that could be lost forever if her brother succeeded. The night before their planned meeting with the southern clans, they huddled beneath the cover of massive mushrooms that glowed softly with bioluminescence. The fire they had built flickered between them, casting shadows on the walls of the cave. Luke felt the weight of the coming days ahead press heavily on him. He couldn't shake the feeling that the path they were walking would change everything. "I'm glad you're here," Xena said softly as they sat by the fire, her voice low but filled with sincerity. She reached over, her hand brushing against his. There was no urgency in the touch, no tension, just a quiet understanding, the kind that had developed over their time together. Luke turned his head to meet her gaze, the glow of the fire dancing in her amber eyes. "I wouldn't be anywhere else," he said quietly, his voice filled with a sense of conviction he didn't entirely understand. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the jungle around them. The sounds of the night creatures filled the air, the distant calls of animals and the rustle of leaves in the wind. For a brief moment, it almost felt normal, almost. The next morning, they set out early, the morning mist still clinging to the jungle floor as the first light of day filtered through the trees. They moved quickly, silently as they had so many times before, using the paths that Xena knew best. Every step brought them closer to the sacred grove, the heart of Viridia 7, where the elders would be waiting. But as they reached the final ridge before the grove, something shifted, the air grew heavier and the distant rumble of engines reached their ears. Tarek had found them. His forces were close. "We need to move faster," Xena whispered urgently, her expression tight with fear. Luke nodded, adrenaline coursing through his veins. There was no time to waste. They had to reach the elders before Tarek's forces did. As they descended the ridge, the grove came into view. The sacred site was breathtaking, an ancient place of beauty and power, the trees standing tall and proud around a massive crystal at the center, glowing softly in the early light. But it wasn't the tranquil scene that caught Luke's attention. It was the movement he saw at the edge of the grove. Tarek's warriors were already there. Waiting, the elders were gathered, but they were surrounded. Xena stopped suddenly, her amber eyes narrowing as she surveyed the scene. "We're too late," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Luke felt a surge of frustration. They had come so far and now it seemed like the end of the road. But he refused to give up. Not now. Not after everything they had endured. He turned to Xena, meeting her gaze. "You can still make it," he said, his voice firm. "We'll distract them. You talk to the elders. We can still win this." Xena hesitated for a moment, but then her lips curved into a faint smile. "You always think like a soldier, don't you?" "I think like someone who doesn't want to lose," Luke replied with a grin. With a nod, Xena moved quickly into position, disappearing into the shadows of the grove. Luke did the same, silently circling the perimeter, ready to create the distraction they needed. It was risky, but it was their only option. As he crept into position, Luke heard the voices of Tarek's warriors growing louder. He could see them now, their weapons drawn, their eyes scanning the surrounding area. Tarek's voice rang out. booming across the clearing. "I come to you not as a conqueror, but as a visionary," he declared, his tone filled with self-righteousness. "Core people have lived in the shadows of these trees for too long. It's time we claim our rightful place among the stars." Luke's jaw clenched. He had heard this speech before. The rhetoric of power, the justification for destruction. But this time, it wasn't just about a speech. It was about the future of a world. Xena had made her move. The crystal in the center of the grove began to pulse with light. Luke felt the shift in the air, the power rising around them. He took a deep breath and launched his attack. With quick precision, he let loose a volley of shots from his sling, targeting the torches held by Tarek's warriors. The flames sputtered and died, plunging the clearing into darkness. Pandemonium erupted. Tarek turned, his face contorted with fury. "Find them!" he roared, his voice laced with desperation. "Bring me their heads." The warriors scrambled in the dark, disoriented, but the elders remained steady. Their glowing markings provided them with perfect clarity, and Xena's voice rang out, amplified by the power of the crystal. "People of Viridia 7, hear me," she cried. "Tarek would destroy everything that makes our world unique, everything our ancestors fought to protect. Are we to throw away millennia of wisdom for one man's ambition?" The jungle itself seemed to respond. Vines crept across the ground, tangling the feet of Tarek's warriors. Bioluminescent flowers unfurled, sending bursts of blinding pollen into the air. Tarek, realizing his plan was unraveling, made a desperate lunge toward the crystal. "No," he snarled. "I will not be denied. The power will be mine." But before he could reach it, a shimmering wall of energy sprang up between him and his goal. The elders had formed a circle, their combined power creating a barrier that even Tarek couldn't penetrate. "Enough," the lead elder intoned. "Tarek, son of Zarin, you have shown your true colors this day. Your vision is not of progress but of ruin. You are hereby banished from the sacred grove and stripped of your title as clan leader." Tarek's face contorted in rage and disbelief. "You can't do this. I am the rightful heir. The rightful heir stands before us," another elder said, gesturing toward Xena. Xena stood tall and proud beside the crystal, the light from it casting an ethereal glow around her. The crowd of warriors had fallen silent, some laying down their weapons in defiance of Tarek's command. Tarek stood alone, the weight of his ambition and arrogance crashing down around him. With a final snarl of frustration, he turned and fled into the jungle, disappearing into the shadows. Luke made his way to Xena's side, her body relaxed but her face still set with determination. "It's done," she whispered. "But this is only the beginning. There's so much healing to be done, so much to rebuild." Luke squeezed her hand, feeling a new sense of purpose take root. "And you'll lead them?" Xena nodded, her expression softening. "Eyes," she said, her voice firm with conviction. "I will." The elder approached Xena, their expression solemn but approving. "Xena, daughter of Zarin," the elder intoned, "you have proven yourself worthy of your father's legacy. Will you accept the mantle of leadership and guide our people into a new era?" Xena straightened, her chin lifting with quiet pride. "I will," she said, her voice carrying across the grove. A cheer went up from the gathered crowd. Luke stood beside Xena, feeling a sense of pride swell in his chest. She had done it. She had united her people. And he was right there with her, ready to face whatever challenges came next. As the twin suns of Viridia 7 began to rise, bathing the sacred grove in a golden light, Luke knew that his journey had only just begun. But this time he wasn't alone. He had found a new home, a new purpose, and most importantly, a new family. And together, that they would face whatever the future held. The days that followed the confrontation in the sacred grove were a whirlwind of change and hope. The elder's blessing had not only solidified Xena's position as the rightful leader of her people, but it had also ignited something deeper. Something that could not be undone. The warriors who had once pledged their loyalty to Tarek now stood alongside Xena, following her vision for a unified and peaceful Viridia 7. The jungle, once a place of danger and uncertainty, now felt like a sanctuary. The threat of Tarek's forces had not disappeared entirely, but his defeat had broken the momentum of his rebellion. With the support of the southern clans secured, Xena's leadership began to reshape the land itself. Luke had become a trusted advisor, his Earth-born perspective offering a unique, tactical advantage in their new fight for freedom. What had started as a crash landing on a strange planet had morphed into something far larger, a battle for a world's future. His tactical knowledge, honed through years of military training, proved invaluable. With each passing day, as Xena's people rallied around her, Luke found his place here. He wasn't just a lost pilot anymore, he was part of something much bigger. They spent their nights strategizing, their days gathering allies, mapping out the secret paths through the jungle, and preparing for the inevitable retaliation from Tarek. It wasn't a matter of if, But when, and Xena knew that every move they made now would determine the course of history for Viridia 7. One evening, as the twin moons rose high in the sky, Xena and Luke sat together beside a fire in one of their many hidden camps deep in the jungle. The air was thick with humidity, the kind of weight that pressed down on your chest, yet somehow, being with Xena felt different. She was a presence in the jungle, a part of it, and Luke could feel it. Every movement she made, every glance from those amber eyes, seemed to communicate with the world around her. And Luke, he had become part of that world too. "I think we've reached the tipping point," Xena said, her voice low, barely above a whisper. Her gaze was fixed on the flames dancing in front of them, but her thoughts seemed to be miles away. "The people are rallying behind us, but the hardest part is still ahead. We need to unite the clans, and we need to make sure they stay united. If Tarek tries to return, we have to be prepared to fight with everything we have." Luke nodded, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of his makeshift knife, the only weapon he had left. "We've been preparing, but I know we'll need more than just strategy to win this." "You're right. It's about keeping the unity strong." Xena turned to look at him, her amber eyes gleaming with an intensity that spoke of her resolve. "The unity among the clans is fragile. We can't afford to lose anyone to fear or doubt. The people need to believe in the future we're building together." Luke felt a sudden rush of gratitude for Xena. She was the true leader here, not just because she had inherited the title, but because she carried the weight of it with a wisdom that transcended mere ambition. And for all her strength, there was something about her vulnerability, her willingness to share her fears with him, that only made him respect her more. "We'll keep them together," Luke said, his voice firm. His eyes locked with hers. "Whatever it takes." Xena didn't smile, but there was a quiet appreciation in her gaze. She reached out, her hand finding his, and for a moment, the noise of the jungle faded away. It was just the two of them, sitting by the fire, fighting the same battle with the same purpose. As they sat in comfortable silence, Luke's thoughts wandered to Earth. He hadn't thought about his home planet in a while. He had found a new purpose here, one that kept him awake at night, planning and preparing. But Earth was still there, a distant memory, and a world he wasn't sure he would ever return to. "Do you ever think about Earth?" Xena asked suddenly, her voice breaking the stillness. "What it was like, I mean." Luke glanced over at her, surprised by the question. He hadn't expected her to ask, but somehow it felt right to answer. "I do," he said, his voice soft. "Korth is complicated. It's beautiful in its own way, but it's also full of contradictions. We've accomplished so much technologically, but we're still fighting the same old battles. Over resources, power, land. I used to think it was just a matter of time before we figured it out. But now, I'm not so sure." Xena's brow furrowed, as if considering his words carefully. "You think the people of Earth will never find peace?" she asked. Luke sighed, leaning back against the tree behind him. "I don't know. We've been trying for a long time, but every time we make progress, it feels like we take a step backward. Maybe we're just not ready for the responsibility of what we've created. Or maybe we've forgotten how to live in harmony with each other. But don't think you're alone in that," Xena said softly. "There are always those who want more, who see power as the solution to everything. But that isn't the only way." Luke's heart skipped a beat at her words. There was a sadness in her voice, a recognition of the same struggles that had followed humanity for centuries. But there was also hope, a glimmer of something better. It wasn't just about winning the war. It was about creating something new, something sustainable. "The more I learn about you, about your people," Luke said, his voice quieter now, "the more I see that maybe we're going about things all wrong. The way you think, the way you lead. It's not about domination. It's about harmony. You understand what it means to live with the land, not take from it. Maybe we could learn something from you." Xena's eyes softened as she met his gaze. "I think," she said slowly, "that all worlds, no matter how different they are, share the same struggles. We're all trying to find balance, whether it's with each other or with the land, the stars, or even within ourselves." Luke smiled, the weight of his earlier doubts lifting slightly. "Maybe, but sometimes balance seems so hard to find." "Sometimes it is," Xena agreed, her voice low, "but it's worth the fight." The sound of footsteps broke their quiet moment. Xena tensed, her gaze immediately shifting to the shadows surrounding them. Luke was already on his feet, scanning the dark jungle for any sign of movement. The uneasy feeling that had lingered at the back of his mind resurfaced. Tarek's forces were always close. They knew they couldn't stay in one place for long. "It's them," Xena said, her voice sharp and alert. "Tarek's warriors are approaching." Luke's hand went to the sling he had crafted, his eyes scanning the area. He had fought with the crew of Earth Space Forces, But this was different. The stakes here were higher, and though Xena's people were formidable, they were still outnumbered. "What's the plan?" Luke asked. Xena's voice was low but confident. "We'll split up. You take the southern path. I'll lead them in the opposite direction. We need to create a diversion and draw them away from the others." Luke nodded, his pulse quickening. "Got it. Be careful, Xena." Her amber eyes locked with his. "I'll be fine. Just don't let them catch you." Without another word, they separated, each disappearing into the thick undergrowth. The jungle was their ally, and they used it to their advantage, moving swiftly and silently through the trees. As Luke navigated the southern path, his mind raced. The enemy was closing in, and their chances of escape were growing slimmer by the minute. But he wouldn't let Xena down, he couldn't. In the distance, the sound of shouts and orders echoed through the jungle. The battle for Viridius 7 was far from over. But Luke knew one thing. As long as they fought together, there was hope. He tightened his grip on his weapon, steeling himself for what was to come. The tension in the air was thick, the jungle almost alive with the sense of impending conflict. Luke's heart raced as he pushed forward, his feet silent against the soft earth, his body alert to every crack of a twig, every shift in the breeze. The trees above him seemed to whisper, their leaves rustling like murmurs in the wind. Tarek's warriors were near. He could feel them, their presence like a dark shadow creeping closer. The plan had been simple: split up, draw the enemy away from the sacred grove, and allow the elders to remain hidden for as long as possible. But nothing in this jungle or in the war with Tarek ever went according to plan. Luke paused at the edge of a small clearing, where the flickering light of distant torches cut through the dense underbrush. He could see the silhouettes of Tarek's forces, their movement calculated and deliberate as they searched for any sign of him or Xena. The sense of urgency was palpable. If they got too close, everything would fall apart. The alliance he and Xena had worked so hard to build would be crushed before it ever had a chance to solidify. His fingers tightened around his sling, the weapon a symbol of his desperation and resolve. He had no idea how many soldiers Tarek had brought with him, but he couldn't afford to underestimate them. They were outnumbered, and their odds were growing slimmer by the second. Through the dense foliage, he spotted one of the warriors advancing alone. Luke's instincts kicked in. This was his moment. He moved quickly, ducking low and rolling silently to the edge of the clearing. His eyes locked on his target, the lone warrior with his back turned, scanning the trees ahead. Luke crept closer, keeping to the shadows, his movements fluid and almost animalistic. He leapt from the shadows, his hand shooting out to grab the warrior's throat. Before the man could react, Luke twisted, slamming him against the earth with a force that knocked the air from his lungs. The soldier gasped for breath, his eyes wide with shock, but Luke was faster. With a swift motion, Luke rendered him unconscious, his pulse quickening from the surge of adrenaline. The sound of the scuffle barely reached the ears of the rest of Tarek's warriors, who were still searching farther ahead. Luke's breath was ragged as he dragged the unconscious soldier into the cover of the underbrush. He didn't have time to waste. As he caught his breath, the realization hit him hard. This wasn't just about evading capture anymore. It was about the survival of an entire world. Xena's world, the thought steadied him. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, he was fighting for everything she had lost, for everything she had built. In the distance, a shout broke through the night, the voice of one of Tarek's men signaling that the soldier was missing. Luke's heart sank. His window of opportunity was closing, with the element of surprise now gone. The time to make his escape was now. He moved quickly, weaving through the trees, and eventually, he saw Xena's familiar silhouette in the distance. She was drawing the warriors away from the grove. Just as planned, her movements were fluid like a predator toying with her prey, luring them deeper into the jungle. "Xena," Luke whispered as he caught up to her. "Need to move. They know we're here." Xena didn't break stride as she turned toward him, her amber eyes sharp with determination. "No," she replied. "We have to keep them off balance. If we can get to the river, we'll have a better chance of losing them." Luke nodded. Without a word, they moved together, running faster now. The sounds of pursuit followed them, but the jungle, with its labyrinth of trees and dense underbrush, was their ally. Luke knew the terrain better now, and Xena's natural connection to the land guided them through it with ease. The roar of the river grew louder in the distance. They were close. But just as they reached the final stretch toward the water, a sharp, guttural shout echoed behind them. Tarek's men were closing in fast. "We're not going to make it to the river," Luke called out, his voice strained with the realization. "We will," Xena said fiercely. "Trust me." In a split second, Xena darted left, disappearing into the thickest part of the jungle, and Luke followed her without hesitation. The plan was clear: They needed to move in opposite directions to confuse their pursuers. It wasn't ideal, but it was their best chance. Luke took off, his body moving instinctively. His mind focused solely on the mission. He could hear the shouts of the warriors behind him, but his feet never faltered. He was running for more than just his life now. He was running to give Xena the time she needed to meet with the elders and ensure the safety of the sacred grove. The jungle seemed to close in around him, the shadows deepening as the sun dipped lower in the sky. He had no idea where the warriors were now, but he was out of sight, and that was all that mattered. But as he pressed forward, the quiet in the air suddenly felt wrong. There was a movement behind him, a rustling in the leaves that wasn't caused by the wind. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He wasn't alone. He spun around, barely raising his makeshift weapon before a tall, shadowy figure appeared in the clearing. The outline of a soldier's armor gleamed dimly in the twilight. "You've been a difficult one to catch," the soldier sneered. Luke's grip on the sling tightened, ready to face whatever threat had found him. But he wasn't done yet. His instincts told him there was always a way out, always a chance to turn the odds. This wouldn't be the end. The warrior lunged forward, his weapon raised high. Luke's heart raced as the adrenaline surged, his mind calculating in fractions of a second. As the soldier swung his weapon, Luke sidestepped, ducking under the strike and delivering a swift blow to the man's midsection. The soldier staggered back, momentarily winded, giving Luke the opening he needed. But just as Luke prepared to finish the fight, a powerful voice rang out from behind him, commanding authority and strength. "Enough." Luke froze. A new figure had entered the fray. It was Xena. She was standing there, poised and unwavering, her amber eyes glowing with intensity. The warriors had followed her path through the jungle, and now it was clear that the time for subtlety had passed. "The Terex forces will not take our world," she declared, her voice carrying through the air like a clarion call. "Not while I stand. Not while we stand." The soldiers hesitated, unsure how to react. They were outnumbered now, caught between the elders and Xena's united front. Xena moved forward, her spear in hand, every movement purposeful. "You've fought us," Xena said, her gaze never leaving the warriors in front of her. "You've tried to break us, but you're too late. The people of Viridius 7 are with me." The warriors looked at each other, the fire of doubt growing within them. Tarek's reign of fear was faltering, and the resistance Xena had built was stronger than they had ever realized. Luke watched in awe as Xena's words cut through the tension like a blade. She had proven herself to them. She had shown them the strength of unity, the power of compassion, and the unbreakable bond between herself and her people. One by one, the soldiers lowered their weapons. The tension that had held the jungle in its grip began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet, uncertain peace. Xena turned to Luke, her amber eyes meeting his. Her expression softened, but there was no mistaking the strength in her gaze. "You were right," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "We don't have to accept tyranny. We never did." Luke stepped forward, offering a hand to her, his voice thick with emotion. "Couldn't have done it without you." Xena smiled, her hand closing around his. "And I couldn't have done it without you." As they stood there, surrounded by the people of Viridius 7, the first rays of dawn began through the dense canopy above them. The sacred grove, once threatened by war and destruction, was now a symbol of rebirth, a new beginning for the world Xena had saved. And Luke, once a lost pilot from Earth, had found his place beside her. In the jungle of Viridius 7, he had found not only a new world but a new purpose. Together they would face the challenges ahead. Together they would rebuild. With their hands joined and their hearts aligned, they would create a future built on unity, strength, and the unwavering belief that no world was too far gone to save. In the end, they had become more than just allies, they had become family. And as the twin suns of Viridius 7 rose higher in the sky, casting their golden light across the land, Luke knew one thing for certain: the best was yet to come.